the audiences. When did the post-war strategy begin and conclude, and how does it contrast with the approaches of traditional empires? Although the US spent significantly on this approach, so too did nations like Britain, France, and the Soviet Union on their respective empires. Might one perceive the prohibition of empires as a tactic by the US to restrict rivals from forming their own empires, thereby maintaining American dominance with its North American empire and vassals in Western Europe and East Asia? And we've already had an argument in answers and right.
All right.
Just go ahead and read it. So, first I said, this and some following questions will show the schism between Curt and me, which I suspect might have been the goal here. The individual asking the questions is representing my stance and the stance of much of the right wing, as in dissident right. Even if one were to accept justifications of moral high ground that this is about getting rid of empires completely and America turning into a global empire brings some sort of unexpected side effect, which is extremely dubious. It's not at all clear getting rid of empires is a moral good for the world. Many nations were better off as protectorates of larger empires, and competition between them can produce better outcomes by various metrics than monopoly of one or two that get to impose values and policies completely out of line with human nature and nature in general. Give me back Habsburgs any day. And then Curt responds, Andres, I can't argue with
Okay,
my
I'll respond. If can I gotta find it though. Where's the first one?
yes.
All right, so there's I got more out of Martin reading it this time than I did out of the first time I read it. So there's basically a couple of premises in there I'll take issue with. One is that an empire is a via positiva organization, which says you must. And federation is a via negativa organization that says you may not. So what the US is trying to do is, in the post-war era, is end the age of empires. Because empires have to war continuously over control over trade routes and control over resources. And if the argument was people were better off under previous conditions, I would argue that it's true about the Habsburgs, but it's not true about the rest of the world. Because you can see by the rapid growth that's happened everywhere that we've allowed this through trade, it does benefit. It has benefited everybody, and it benefits the people who are worse off the most. So the first thing I would counter is that the U.S. is trying to build a federal system and it is trying desperately to shepherd people into autonomy and self-responsibility in order to prevent world wars. And the second point is that the evidence is that this has been the most successful project in human history. The correct criticism of it is that it has been sold ideologically as an opposition to communism, and this ideological sale, this via positiva sale, is what's wrong. And because we're selling democracy and we're selling consumerism, which is the counter to communism, but we're also letting all liberal hedonism and immorality ride on top of it, unconstrained, to the point where, we're trying to promote LGBT and homosexuality, whatever, which is which are properties that have contributed to the destruction of the family in the West and our declining populations to the rest of the world, and they don't want anything to do with it. They don't want anything to do with our liberal morality, which is really unregulated, undisciplined human consumption and discipline. and the reason's worse for them is because they're trying to get their people into defense of the commons, and we're already there. So I would say that I disagree with all the points there, all the major points, but I agree that the spread, the use of this mission by the progressives has been catastrophic. Moritz, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, you often use terms, of course, as shorthand, like, for example, the US strategy. But I think in this case, it pays to identify who that is, the US. It's not the US as the US, it's the elite that used to construct the framework of the society, and then the pitch, let's say, to the other civilizations, which are no longer in power the way they used to be.
Correct. That's brilliant. Thank you. And this is where I should say that Martin's right. Is that the strategy that was put in place in 1944, 1945, the Bretton Woods method and everything that fell out of it was that we couldn't fight the communists alone, and the world was in too bad a shape after the world wars. And so that what we did is we subsidized everybody with access to the only remaining market, America, for free at American workers' expense, in order to allow the world to rebuild and hopefully to entice those cultures that were going through transition into the rule of law model rather than the rule of man model, because our view was that the communism was just another form of dictatorship, and that which has turned out to be real true, and it was going to be detrimental to mankind and basically form the new basis of empires, just like Islam formed a base of new empires, and just as Islam has adopted, and since the 70s, the same strategy as the Marxists. So you're right. What happened is, in the especially during the Vietnam War, the Jewish left displaced the Anglo classical liberals as the elites, and they did this by design, by capturing the institutions, and because the institutions at that time were forced to try to maintain scientific and technological advantage over the Soviets and the communists in general. And so they moved from loyalty in the higher academy to credentialism only in the academy. And so this let people into the academy who had seditious ambitions, and those people then moved into the various organs of government and proceeded with their so-called march to the institutions of cultural production. So the moral ambition we had has been captured by an immoral culture. Is that, Moritz, does that satisfy the question?
Yes, and I just add for further disambiguation, I think the comment that when you say we, that is primarily a strategy set out by the elite, which is a fairly small minority of a population, and then sold to the population that, to a large extent back then, still had the capacity to actually evaluate that and make a reasoned consent or have reasoned support for it, rather than only be sold to.
And they had higher trust. I mean, part of the left's
Yes.
ambition is to undermine trust, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what they do. They cause dissent. So you're right. So even if they were an elite, the public had reasonable amount of trust in them.
Yeah,
and so
and they had the mechanisms available to validate that trust. The trust was not merely a holdover from, let's say, a blindness or some kind of other previous successful form of trust, of creating that, but it was the consequence of a fairly widely existing self-determination, and therefore cooperation as a consequence of everybody being able to self-determine.
Mm-hmm. Brandon, you're on mute.
We've proven that we can't hold it. We can't purport to export it any longer.
Yeah, I love you, Brandon, because you first, you're so parsimonious, and you cut to the end, and then I've got to figure out how the hell you got there. So I want to help I can figure that out, but could you explain that for the audience?
Sure. We're attempting to export rule of law and, as we describe it, democracy, participatory government between the peoples involved in governing. We've pushed that franchise down to everybody here, essentially, just too many. And then we've exported their intuitions to the rest of the world, which are not congruent or concordant with their peoples. I mean, they disrupt other places worse and faster than it disrupts us here.
Yeah, so
I
that's
certainly see
the argument.
democracy as a hostile imposition. Take it away, please.
So the argument I usually make is it's the India versus China argument. You need to have a military, or the Prussians are the ones who invented this, but you need to have a military that is loyal to the state first. And from there you can build rule of law. From there you can build rule of law into a market economy. But we did it over 600 years at minimum, and it's probably over 1800 closer. So we did it over a very long period of time, and so the rest of the world has had to do it in a short period of time. So while we could do it, we could dispose of generations, so to speak, the ignorance of generations, other civilizations can't. So when you take them immediately to democracy, unless they've got most of the package, it's very hard for them. So of course you could get literacy in China if you have the Red Army, if you have a history of empire. And of course they had a hell of a time doing it in India. So, of course Prussia could do it. Our systems are all basically Prussian because that's what happened, right? We brought them all back here once we understood what efficient government looked like. So what I think Brandon's trying to say is that you just can't take these things willy-nilly to people and start with democracy and hope it's all going to work out. You have to actually evolve a population to the point where they have the rational incentives to be able to engage in participatory democracy without regressing to what their natural intuition is, which is to favor self and family and maybe clan over the interests of the commons. It's actually really hard to develop the commons comes first. I mean, we got a German here. I mean, they're freaking the masters of it, right? One of the things I notice you notice in negotiating around the world, and of course there's tons of people who teach this stuff, is that like the just small differences in how open and trustworthy you are. Like you can count on Germans to be open and direct the whole time. You can count on Russians to be direct but not open. You can count on Americans to be overly communicative in an effort to build trust, right? You could count on the French to try to scam you in whatever way possible, right? I mean, there's to bully you, and so you can negotiate with the Arabs, and you realize that it doesn't make any difference because whatever they agree to today, they're going to change tomorrow, right? And so you run into these cultures, and we all have different commitments to the commons, and so it's very hard to produce commitment to the common. And the only way we've discovered how to do it is the way we do, which is militia, military, state, rule of law, and then you build an economy. And if we try to make people bypass that process, they're starting out with the wrong raw material in the population. Is it working somewhere? Well, it's working where the IQ is there. And it's not working where the IQ isn't there. So it really depends. IQ is just adaptability. Go ahead, Francis.
So Curt, then now I have a question. For civilizations like China, where state is a founding institution, is it even possible to unwind the clock, so to speak, and truly build a rule of law society? Because in Europeans, you started evolving from small bands and so on, and you gradually built the institutions through law first,
Yes,
whereas China started with state first. And
yes.
I think back in the days, this is probably around the first decade after the founding of the PLA, there was a famous conversation between then Premier and Zhou Enlai and another guy. And so it goes. One of them was asking the other whether it's possible to build a rule of law society. And then Chairman Mao jumped in and basically said, I think we still need to go with rule of men, basically state.
Right. Well, the rule of law is beautiful in that if everybody, it's a policing cost, right? So the reason you want rule of law is the same reason you want to get rid of slavery. It's just incredibly much cheaper. The evidence of the Chinese people, though, is entrepreneurial, right? I mean, the Chinese diaspora is incredibly successful. So there's no reason we can see from the outside why the incentive isn't there. The problem is the country's too big. It's sort of like the American problem today, right? Because the country's too big. And so when you try to organize it like that, in other words, it's a great market in the sense that it's big and has enough of a common language, right, and protocols, but it's pretty hard to actually take initiative. We saw what the entrepreneurs did there before the state clamped down on them. And yeah, there was a lot of bullshit going on there, right? I mean, talk about financial nonsense. I mean, there was the whole idea of becoming a bank and then letting the government carry all the risky debt while you took all the profits. I mean, that was kind of unfair. But I mean, if you look at the Chinese, there's no evidence the Chinese can't do it. Matter of fact, the evidence is quite the contrary. It's unfortunate that the kleptocracy at the top won't let them do it. Because it looked like it was going fine to me. I don't know. I'm asking for your feedback.
I think there's a fear in any central government that ruled over China that if they divest too much power from central government down to the state and provincial and the city level, then China would just disintegrate apart. And there's a certain truth in that throughout history, this has repeated, rings and repeat many, many times, mostly as if you believe George Friedman from Stratford, is because of the geopolitics of China.
Right. So again, I'm going to say, yeah, but why can't, you can have a via negativa central government, which is what the original US was sent to be. It's really what the German princedoms were sent to be, is that you can say, all right, well, these are the limits. Within these limits, it's none of our fucking business. But for everyone's good, we have to have these limits. And then let that entrepreneur, I mean, it was working, right? I mean, there was all this evidence it was working. So I don't know how to look at it any other way than there's evidence the Chinese people can do it. So if you say there's dissolution, well, the cycle of empire to federation is well known, right? You create an empire to create you create a standard of behavior, standard of weights and measures, but then at some point the empire becomes a rent seeker, and so you break into federations, and so and redistribute the government. It looks, I don't see why China can't do that, and I haven't anyone give me an answer. They blame it on this culture thing, except I'm like, you could blame it on this culture thing in your head, but I'd have to see evidence that it wasn't possible. But if you look at Chinese diaspora all the world, it's second only to Jews. So I can't see the argument. I'm waiting for a counter argument to see if you got one.
I haven't got one.
Yeah, I don't think there is one. I mean, you have a large population with a long history, sufficient homogeneity, right? You have a large body of people. It's got territorial sovereignty, right? You have huge waterways. You have, it's all the land is pretty much used, but you have everything going there. Trains can work there, unlike they can't work in the United States, or as well as even Germany. So you look at this geography, you look at the population, you look at the history, you look at the resources. If I don't see any evidence. I mean, really, what prevented China from being first is the government. I mean, the centralization of the government, bureaucracy, and the conversion of the bureaucracy from empirical to moral, right, is a legendary story of Chinese history. So why did China not become the West of the expansion? And it's because of the government. The people think a colonial period, this is a great bit of understanding, is that a lot of the colonial period happened because locals asked the British government to come save them from the fucking entrepreneurs and pirates.
Mhm.
Right? Because the power, that was so easy to use the new technology for 100 guys to get together and go out and conquer some territory, that to over these people who had no advanced weaponry, that often the local populations asked the European governments to come govern them, because it wasn't safe for them otherwise. And I can't remember where it is that the British government refused somebody like 7 or 8 times before they finally gave in. So I don't know. There's no reason. I mean, the real thing is the IQ's there. The IQ's there. The Confucian morality is there. And I just don't see how it can't.
I think the IQ is there
Even
for
the history of it, even the history of the academic achievement, the history of study. I mean, all that stuff I still see it evidence coming out of the culture all the time.
I think the IQ is there for the core Han Chinese territories. You can't say the same for the Western buffer zones.
Right.
And that's the place that the central government has to placate.
I see.
Because
So-
otherwise, historically, that's been where the barbarians come in. So unlike the United States, which has a western border secured by ocean, the Chinese western border is secured by desert. It's hard to traverse, doesn't mean that it cannot be traversed.
Mhm, mhm. Well, again, I would say, great, that's a federal issue. And solve it with the federal government specifically allocated that issue. But the central government's ambitions to become a world power over the interests of the people
Mhm.
is fucking insane.
Yeah.
Because I know all of us were, the Chinese are doing it, and all of a sudden this guy comes along and he throws a wrench in the works, and we're like, what the fuck?
He's
It's not
got
in
a
the
chip
people,
on his shoulders.
I guess.
Okay, anyways, didn't want to,
Did we stray from a question?
didn't want to
I was
diverge.
just going to say the same could be said about American government, trying to be a world power against interests of the American people.
Well, although take away the world power status, especially the dollar, and the American people get as poor as the Europeans. Right quick.
Yeah, that's happening right now.
Yeah, I know.
Super speed.
Well, I don't know. Let's see. I don't see anybody who can put together the basic thing about a currency is for large amounts of money to work under it, you have to have predictable rule of law, and there's nobody that protects property like the UK and the US. There's just no alternative. So I don't see money flowing anywhere else.
I was also going to address the supposed export of democracy. It's not an export of democracy. I criticize democracy all the time, but we wouldn't be anywhere in as bad a situation as we are if will of the people actually mattered. Because we observe that whenever people vote wrong, their will is ignored. What's actually exported is anti-fascism.
Okay, so sorry, let me clarify. So what you're saying is the evidence is that the government does not give the people what it wants, it gives it what the elites want. That's what you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
Right. So I would say all that matters is rule of law, the democracy. Democracy is a perk if you succeed at rule of law. And that's it. And even then, it's as you said, it's becoming questionable whether democracy is actually very useful.
Or
Yeah,
possible.
but I also argue that this was the goal from the beginning of the post-war order. Anti-fascism was immediately imposed on the Germans, and anti-fascism really means anti-order and anti-masculinity.
I can't test that one. The way the people at the time thought about it was classical liberalism, was the triangle. Well, it's really four sides. It's classical liberalism, French liberalism, socialism, German, Italian socialism, fascism, and communist authoritarianism. Right? I mean, that was your diamond to work
Do you
from.
mean a tetrahedron or actually a diamond?
I meant a diamond, but it's technically you can represent it on the triangle. I'm just trying to put 4 points together and not confuse the audience. All right. So there's basically 4 points, and everybody knew that's what they were doing. Everybody at the time knew there was a battle between the English model, the French model, the Germanic model, and the communist model, and everybody knew what was going on, and they knew it, and they were all afraid of it. I mean, the fascists were terribly afraid of the communists, and they were right to be. Like I said, Germany's always right. I wouldn't say that out too out loud. They were right to be. The Continentals in general were right that the legal system for an island nation like the UK, with a long history of rule of law, and the people who invented it, along with the Dutch, right? That's obviously that's too far advanced for some of these cultures to go through quickly. The French are always authoritarian, and all they did is produce the nobility and the church as theological into the French philosophy of moral philosophy, but just secular Catholicism. And the Germans produced Kant to Hegel, and their attempt to do the same thing but with reason instead. And the Jews tried to create it their way, which is an underclass way, and that they were successful in propagating into Russia. So I mean, all cultures were acting in what we would consider a rational manner at the time. It's just that none of those rational matters were durable ideas. They were, in general, steps in a process, hopefully, of getting to what we would call classical liberalism or rule of law. There's no better term that we have yet today. So, I mean, theoretically, what you would want is everybody to be under classical liberalism, which is really very close to what we would call social democracy today.
They're not fit.
Correct. Say that again.
We're not fit. They're not fit. We can't hold it now. You need the law first, and we don't have that. And they don't have it anywhere.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the way it was conceived of was completely contrary to human nature.
It was optimistic. All of the Enlightenment philosophies were optimistic.
That's a euphemistic way to say it.
Well, I mean, I love this difference between you and I, because I try to look at the positive side and you try to look at the underbelly. But if I look into the minds of those people, that's what they thought. I mean, you can see it in what they said, how they approached the world, what they thought they were doing, what they wrote about.
We'll give them their optimism then, right? If they lose it now.
Correct. Right. I mean, it's okay to experiment, right? You have to experiment, right? They took an experiment, and unfortunately, and we have a better chance of it than others were, is that it failed pretty fast. right? It failed pretty hard and pretty fast. So, and the reason is precisely that optimism. It's just you can too much optimism, and when you take away the constraints, I mean, this is one of the things. So let's not pick on Chairman Z. How do you say it right? Z,
C.
she, right? As for a moment, he says, I don't like Western consumerism because I think it makes the people lazy.
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong. And I would say it's worse. It makes their minds lazy. And so it's not like we've got the right answer. It's like, right, Brandon, we fucked up. We've run the experiment and it failed. Well, more interestingly, every one of those experiments failed.
Experiments can fail, operations don't.
Yeah, exactly. So if I look at it, those experiments failed, and I could be like Martin and assume the worst of everybody. Martin, I'm just fucking with you, or I could say, well, these people, all of them thought, because you could see it in what they said, they thought they were doing the right thing, and there's a little truth to every civilization doing what feels right to it. The problem is everybody was wrong because all that really matters is rule of law. That's all that matters. Other than that, the type of government's almost arbitrary. I'm waiting for Brandon to say something.
So quick time check. We've spent 40 minutes on this question.
Well, it's a great question. I don't feel like I've done it justice. I mean, and that's because we're not including the starting method, right? In other words, the starting condition, which was, holy shit, empires create world wars. Let's stop this world war thing, which was brilliant, right? Then, and we're in a position to do it. The next thing was that because of the Industrial Revolution, everybody's stupidly optimistic about human nature, as if we're all special and virtuous snowflakes, right? And then we introduced women, and then the Jewish left moved to the America and switched from class Marxism to race Marxism in the one country with the least ability to defend itself against ideas. So if you look at those pieces, there's a lot of axes of causality coming together to create the current, oh my God, what a freaking disaster. Don't let women run education ever again. I thought I'd get a laugh out of that one. I got nothing. I got nothing. Don't let women run.
It's just obviously true.
It's just too obviously true. So I think that we've covered the question, but we have to keep it in context of, the Industrial Revolution was like, it created a lot of opportunity for being right and wrong. And, we did some good right things, but we did wrong ones. And our experiment that took an optimistic view of human nature failed. Okay.